right, kids, it's that time again. The Grunge Bible Podcast has come back around for episode number 159. I am one of your hosts, Chris Salona, and I am here with the other host, Ethan Shalloway.
Oh man, what a day. Beautiful day. We're recording here on a Wednesday. And Chris, I got great news for you.
Let's hear it.
I'm going to be seeing you in 2 days.
Yes, you are.
And that is a surprise to some people because it is a surprise for some people. Because
that was very in-depth.
Yes, it was. Well, I realized, I don't know. My brother is having his bachelor party this weekend, so I'm flying home and you are driving down.
You're damn right I am.
We're gonna meet up for a weekend in the cabin. So I'm kind of answering, how I am right now, right off the bat, because I knew you were going to ask that. Yeah. Because that's what we do here. Is
that's what we do.
We check in. You always want to check in on your homies, kiss your homies goodnight. But today we're checking in, and I'm like doing really well because
it's like there's nothing more important than checking up on buds.
Yeah. Oh man, so true. I love that, man. Love Petey. So. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm really in a good space because I got this day and I'm flying home tomorrow and I will be back. And I am, just for everybody out there, I don't know how much we talked about it on the show, but for the month of March, we had this thing and it's been April. And if you see Chris, he's very vehemently against what I'm about to say because it's bringing up a sad new thing in his life. So we cut out caffeine and nicotine for usually the month of April, but I moved it ahead because I have a really busy travel month in April and me and my brother moved it back. Chris is also doing this with us, but he had the opposite. April is a better month for him to cut it out. So right now
it's a worse month. That's why I did it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So right now I have a cup of coffee because we're recording in the morning and I got my Zyn, and Chris over there is raw dog in life. He is just straight water.
I'm locked in.
How are you feeling, Chris? How are the energy levels with the no caffeine?
Well, the first 2 days were the hardest because I had to take, in a span of like 26 hours, I had to make 3 trips to and from Boston, that's a miserable experience even with caffeine and nicotine, but just like raw dogging it. And like I just got back from some travel too. Like I was up in Canada for a couple of weeks and like now I'm back and like I'm doing all right. Like today is like I was walking through the forest for the first couple of days and now the trees are starting to thin out and I notice a clearing and I'm taking it. So I feel okay. It is going to be tough this weekend, like waking up like with all of my pals and not being able to like have coffee with them and like throw a dip in. Exactly. Not going to sleep. Exactly.
It's crazy. Like, You really were away from your home for a while, came back, like long travel back, whatever. And then like the first day that, we have Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, first day back, you have to do all of this driving, get up really early.
At 4 because I had to be in Boston for like 7.
Probably the most taxing night you've had in a month or the most taxing day.
Yeah.
And it was a setup, dude. It was a test.
Yeah, it was. But everything else is going to be easier now, which is the best part.
Everything is a breeze. Yeah, I'm very proud of you.
It's the same philosophy that I take with like I hate exercising in the morning. Like I hate lifting in the morning. Running in the morning was fine, but like you do that and it's like the most physically exerting part of your day is already done, so everything feels easier. So I just kind of like April, non-negotiable April. I hit it hard in the first 48. So now
woke you up for the rest of the day. Yeah,
exactly. So, but yeah, I'm doing good. I got my first good night of sleep in a few days last night, so I feel good today. Here on Wednesday, April 3rd, we're recording this for the 8th. So,
and you had your favorite podcast to get you through that last hour drive.
That was the thing. Yeah. So like I was able to 96.9 the Sack Fly. Like they've started simulcasting and posting, syndicating, I guess. Some of their older stuff. So like I saved an episode that I thought would be interesting, and I listened to it on the drive home from Boston on Monday night after seeing Olivia Rodrigo, and it sustained me.
Those guys are great.
They're really great.
They're some of my favorite guys on the radio.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been doing it for 30 years. I mean, who can say that? That's a long time. Yeah,
that's a long time. Usually people get canceled or people get, they just don't last that
killed.
long.
They could get killed.
They could just simply die. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we've been doing this show for 3 years and that feels like a long time. Imagine doing it 10 times longer than this. That's what
every day too,
Dick
Chris.
and Gord are doing for every single day. Yeah,
We do
I
it once a
couldn't-
week, you know.
Once a week's enough. But honestly, it's been a long time since we've recorded this podcast. Like I went up to Canada like at the beginning, like middle of March, and I think the last time we recorded until today is like it was like March 10th or something. So it's been about 3.5 weeks since we've recorded. So I'm not feeling as fresh as I would like to as it relates to recording the show, but the show must go on.
That's right. So we have a really nice episode for you. We're going to pay some tribute to one of the greats, one of the big four, Kurt Cobain, as one of his anniversaries is coming up. And before we do that, I just want to shout out and thank all of our patrons for all of the levels. We have 3 levels, a $2, $5, and $10. And we want to say thank you to everybody that's supporting us. We're letting Chris take a break from saying the names. I'm taking over. I'm not saying the names. We're just going to say thank you to everybody because the list is getting long. We need it longer though. So please consider hopping on the support train, as we like to call it, and help make this
coffee.
Help make this help make this podcast run and getting into the fight. So thank you everybody that is out there supporting us, because we don't take any money from the people. We do take money from the people. We don't take any money from the businesses, but we should.
We're self-funded.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that, Ethan. I appreciate that. That was going to be a lot for me. So we sit here today on the 3rd, but this episode comes out on the 8th, and the beginning of April is just completely full of monumental occurrences that have happened in music. So we're going to get to it. But 30 years ago today, the world learned that Kurt Cobain had died. His body was discovered the morning of April 8th, 1994, and it wasn't long after that the news outlets began reporting his death, and everybody began to take that in and realize what had happened. So we're going to be discussing Kurt a lot today, as you said, Ethan, and a lot through his words, not necessarily through his music, kind of showing another side. But before we do that, we will get into some This Day in Music for April 8th. And I'm laughing here because we're starting with the birthdays, and we've got perhaps one of the older birthdays that we've ever mentioned on this show. And I'm going to keep it right here because I want to do this one. So
not as old as Abraham Lincoln, but and Andrew Darwin.
Andrew Darwin?
Sorry,
Charles Darwin.
That's my physical therapist name. Shout out to Andrew Darwin. He's the only Darwin that I recognize.
Absolutely. I believe in Darwin supremacy.
Devin.
Yeah,
and,
the 2
and
Darwins. Yeah, there's 3 Darwins, actually. Nevertheless, on this day in 1896, Edgar Yipsel Harburg, otherwise affectionately known as Yip, is born in New York City, and he went on to co-write many popular songs, including Over the Rainbow and Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And that's the question I'm asking to everybody who listens to this podcast, because it's been a long time since we've gotten anybody to join the Patreon. So, brother, can you spare a dime?
That is amazing.
Happy birthday, Yip.
Happy birthday, Yip. He would have been, what, 130, 136 or something like that. Quick math. That's amazing. Moving up to 1962, one of the founding members of one of our favorite bands, Guns N' Roses, sarcasm, is Izzy Stradlin. Stradlin. I'm missing a letter. That's dyslexic right. This morning.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Izzy. Not much more to say about him.
Not much more to say. Moving on up to 1964, on April 8th, 1964, rapper Biz Markie was born Marcel Theo Hall. He passed away in July of 2021, and he is obviously most notably known for the popular song "Just a Friend" that I think everybody kind of knows the chorus to, which is a pretty big impact for sure. So happy birthday to Biz Markie, and also rest in peace. I remember when he died, he was in the hospital for a while and then passed away. So Biz Markie, April 8th, 1964. One more birthday, Ethan. Who do we have?
This is an awesome birthday note that you put on here. Is in 1989, Matthew Healy was born, and he is the lead singer to the 1979. I almost said 75. That was
it is 1975.
I'm thinking about the song 1979.
You are dyslexic this morning.
I'm all disconnected. I was actually thinking about him the other day, and because his music is, if you guys haven't listened to them, like they have some, he's an incredible producer, incredible songwriter, and the music is so good. Like I was listening to the song Part of the Band, which is one of the newer songs that came out like 2 or 3 years ago. And that was
a song of the week for you once, I remember.
Yeah, it was. And it's so good. Our producer, Drew, loves his performances and some of the stuff he does. Like, and our buddy Adam, like I've seen them live, I think just once. And yeah, really, really amazing stuff on stage. I remember he had this like, it was like in the airport when you have those, basically an escalator that's flat. I don't know what they call them. A
walking people mover or something.
People mover. Yeah. And he was like walking on it. So he was walking fast and he was going the other way. He was walking in place. And it was just like cool. You know, it was a great idea. It was like, oh, like that's awesome. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he has really cool ideas and he is a really special performer.
Yeah, absolutely. He's also the world's least problematic social media personality, clearly. But Matty Healy, yeah, I'm a fan of the 1975 for sure. I think you helped me get into them a little bit. I know, I think my favorite song of theirs is Me, like that really fucking just depressing song. I think came out in like 2014 or something. But their most recent album was really solid.
Did you know that he dated Taylor Swift?
Yeah, for like a month and a half pre-Kelsey, right?
Yeah. I didn't know that until I looked it up.
You didn't know that until you knew that.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy. So Matty Healy has a birthday. That's exciting. Now we'll get into some events here. On this day in 1977, The Clash released their self-titled debut album. And I don't know how many times I've said this on this show, possibly dozens, but The Clash are one of the bands that, I need to check out. I really haven't spent much time with them, but I need to.
Oh yeah,
Ethan, have you listened to The Clash?
Clash is one of that's my go-to punk band from that area or that era. I don't listen to them a ton either right now. Mm-hmm. I know, like I said, our producer Drew, big Clash guy. His dad was a huge Clash guy, so I believe he was probably the reason I started listening to them a little bit more back in when I did. So. Yeah, shout out to The Clash. That's almost 50 years ago when they released this first album, which is cool.
Time flies. Not quite 50 years for this band, 30 years, but on this day in 1994, The Offspring released their album Smash, which featured their smash hit Self-Esteem, which catapulted them into stardom. I just posted an Offspring song on Grunge Bible not that long ago. I posted Gone Away. But do you like The Offspring, Ethan? Because I can't do it.
I'll be honest, I do not.
Two bands that I think of in the same way because I dislike them equally: The Offspring and Weezer. I struggle. I decided to stop struggling. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, Weezer is definitely a little bit easier for me to enjoy, but there's something about The Offspring. Top level patron. Doug Endy loves it. I think he's had some tickets in the past and asked me to go, and I was like, I was a little bit busy and I couldn't make the sacrifice. So maybe if I saw him live, it would have been a little different. But and maybe you had to be there. Maybe it was one of those things you had to be there for them.
Right. And we all know that we weren't. So what are you going to
do? Moving up we'll go to 2000. A Saturday Night Live skit was aired where the Blue Oyster Cult recorded "Don't Fear the Reaper." And Christopher Walken demands more cowbell from Will Ferrell, who complies and a catchphrase is born. And everybody knows the skit because everybody needs more cowbell. It was very historic and just hilarious. I mean, that's the glory days of SNL, even though, when people talk about SNL, because we're fans of the late night shows here and all the skits. And but people talk, the glory days that people talk about, I mean, it wasn't, like while it was happening, I don't think it's kind of like a retroactive like praise to it all. Like, I mean, it was still popular back then, but like the legends grow and the people come who they are. And that's why those clips are so great because people didn't know what was happening while it was happening.
Yeah,
with most
you
like
never know the gravity of a moment until it becomes a memory.
yeah. So and that one was, that one obviously stuck for a long time.
Well, it's one of those things that I think most people know, like the more cowbell thing, but I'd say a lot of people don't know where it comes from necessarily. I was that way for a while because I didn't grow up
Really?
watching SNL.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it, but I always knew like more cowbell was a thing that people said. I didn't know why. If only there were some people that could explain it to me at the top of their afternoon drive slot. Perhaps I would have turned out differently.
Why do people say more cowbell? I'll tell you why. Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Exactly. We've got two more here, both from 2016. I'll just tag team both of them and just get them out of the way. So on this day in 2016, the Guns N' Roses reunion tour began in Las Vegas. So we were obviously not there. We were not there for any Guns N' Roses show, naturally. And also, this is one of my more favorite this day in music histories that we've had in a long time. So on this day in 2016, Steve Miller was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And apparently Steve Miller has been very combative towards music award ceremonies and the pomp and circumstance that goes with it. So he's being inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and while he's backstage, like during the ceremony, he goes on an absolute rant and he takes down the Rock Hall of Fame, and he calls it a private boys club, and he goes on to say it's a bunch of jackasses and jerks and fucking gangsters and crooks. And Steve Miller, I'm with you, man. I couldn't agree more. Every fucking late winter, early spring, the Rock Hall does this thing where they're like, you need to vote and see who can get nominated for the Rock Hall of Fame. And everyone always messages us because invariably there's always a band from the 90s. Like Soundgarden was on the list a couple of years, like Rage was on it. Alice in Chains, I don't know if they've been on it, but they're like, oh guys, you need to help get them inducted. Like, I don't give a fuck about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because like if Soundgarden's not in yet, and if Alice in Chains, they're not in the halls of fame for their music, for their accolades, then the halls are fucking meaningless. Like, I don't give a shit about them. I don't lose any sleep over the fact that these bands aren't in. I don't get upset when people are inducted and they're like, oh, that's not rock. Who gives a fuck? Like, stop caring about the Rock Hall of Fame. It doesn't matter.
Rant ended. I love it. I love getting you going out these Hall of Fames, man. That is a classic. Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. Like if
it's
stupid. It doesn't, it really doesn't make any sense. And it is all, how do I say it? Politics.
It is. Exactly.
And we don't get political here.
It's political hand wringing. It's a bunch of fucking bullshit. And I hate it. And it's really stupid.
We should make our own Hall of Fame.
We should. And Steve Miller will be the first inductee.
Yes, he will.
Hopefully we're neither jackasses nor jerks nor gangsters nor crooks. But I guess that's up to him to decide. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's this day in music history, a very momentous day. But the one that we didn't include in that little list here is the one that we talked about at the top of the episode, that the episode's going to be about this person. This is the day, as we mentioned, that Kurt Cobain's death was made public to the world 30 years ago today. He died at the age of 27. Also around this time period, we're focusing the episode on Kurt because today's the 8th, and that's what happened on the 8th in 1994. But April is a very busy calendar in terms of things that have happened relating to our genre. On April 3rd, 2019, Sean Smith, the notable and incredibly talented musician from the Pacific Northwest, he died at age 53, most notably known for his solo work, his work in Brad and his work in Satchel. On April 5th, 2002, Lane Staley passed away, although his death was not announced until April 20th. And I imagine maybe in the next couple of weeks, we'll maybe do an episode about Lane in a similar way to what we're doing with Kurt. And then additionally on April 5th, 1966, Mike McCready was born. So he just recently turned 58 at the time this episode comes out. But this episode's about the 8th, and it's about Kurt. And before we get into kind of Kurt himself, and gaining an understanding and appreciation for who he was through his words. There were a couple of notable things, I think, that happened on the 8th in 1994 once people began learning about his death, related to the genre and people in it. that afternoon they were taping that night's edition of late night, or not late night, but David Letterman's late night show. And Blind Melon were the musical guests for that show. So in the afternoon they were in the studio, and they had selected Change to perform on Letterman that night. And prior to it, Shannon Hoon, on his forehead, he took a magic marker and he wrote a question mark on his forehead, kind of as his response to, Kurt Cobain's death, obviously asking why. And they performed a really, really poignant version of Change on, for the show. And then afterwards, that, he said that he thinks he speaks for a lot of people, and he says that he wants to say goodbye to Kurt Cobain. So heavy on the minds of everybody, and I imagine that's maybe the way that live audience found out when they were standing there watching the performance. And then also that night, Pearl Jam had a show in Fairfax, Virginia, and by the evening time, obviously everybody knew about it. And Eddie Vedder offered some remarks about Kurt's death, and he said, "Sometimes, whether you like it or not, people elevate you, and it's real easy to fall. So I don't want to be somebody who delivers bad news, but I don't think any of us would be in this room tonight if it weren't for Kurt Cobain." So, from around the music world, certainly not the only tributes, but two that have stuck out to me over the years. Two musicians, Eddie Vedder and Shannon Hoon, who I really admire, paying tribute to Kurt Cobain, who we all really admire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I wonder how, the bands feel that they were able to kind of perform the day that same day and kind of talk about it, bring light to it. And I mean, it's obviously a sad, very sad story, but I think there's some comfort that they were able to talk about it and tribute, like, as it was happening, to be in a spotlight, in a position. And it's true. Like, you gotta take the influence as it comes. And, we wouldn't be here playing music without, and like singing the way we were, if it wasn't for Kurt and what he did for the music genre. So that's very powerful to think about, because the influence of these guys were large, obviously. And influence is a very interesting, like, and we'll get into that, like the influence that the media and everything had on Kurt, and how difficult it was how difficult it is for anybody to be a star and stardom. And I see it all the time, especially in the social media era, because there's a lot of people that become, say, famous, quote unquote, because of the numbers behind their name. And just the other day, Angel Reese, they played the Elite Eight game, and they played Caitlin Clark in the NCAA basketball tournament. And afterward, Angel gave a very great post game press conference, and just said, like, it's been really difficult since we won, and all the hate that they get on social media. And although she may be polarizing to people from what they see through the screen, like, that's just her, being competitive. And like her teammates said, like, no one knows Angel except the people that are there. And I think it's a good reminder, because so many people jump to conclusion. The internet is a absolute terrible sin bin area of, like, just shit. Like, people talk so much shit. Like, there's death popping up on Instagram, and people are making jokes about, like, some people are desensitized and they don't understand, like, these are humans, and somebody is reading all of these things. And it really is sick in a lot of ways. And I can't imagine the pressure that people are put on just because they're doing something great for their sport. Because in reality, like, this is the best that women's basketball has been ever. It's
ever been.
And there's such a weird, aura around it all, because people are making it about stuff that it isn't. And I hate it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's a common thread there with what you mentioned. I watched that press conference that Angel Reese gave, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. There's a common thread here of anytime someone's in the public eye, there's two things that are done to them. Number one, they're ridiculed. And number two, they're misunderstood. And I think, as we relate it back to Kurt, those two things were very, very evident. You take somebody who at a young age gets really, really famous for something, and, there are a lot of people that looked down on his artistic talent and on who he was, and, kind of thought of him in terms of just the worst parts of him, and that was it. But behind it, there's a person. And I think with Kurt, people tried so hard to kind of like decide who he was through his music, but all the while, like, he was a very, very inquisitive, introspective, and thoughtful person throughout, all of his interviews and discussions that he had. And like, I think you can gain so much of a better understanding on who he was, perhaps maybe through his words than through his music. He's mentioned a lot of times, throughout his life, that a lot of his words and lyrics of Nirvana are just kind of random things, and like they don't mean what people want them to mean. And meanwhile, he's talking very poignantly about a lot of things that people maybe want to know about him, or trying to explain what it's like to be in his shoes. And I think the perfect quote, as we go through some quotes and words that he said, during his life, I think the perfect one to start with is, "I didn't know how to deal with success. If there was a Rockstar 101, I may have liked to take it. It might have helped me out." And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, people always, there's this weird thing with celebrities, and I think especially with Kurt and Eddie at the time, especially those two, where they're like, oh, like, they totally wanted to get famous, so they deserve all of the consequences. And like, whether or not they intentionally wanted to get famous and made decisions to make that happen, you don't deserve the negative things that come with it. And regardless of whether you wanted it or not, or whether it was sprung upon you, those are really challenging things to deal with. Like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do what Kurt did. I couldn't do what Angel Reese is doing now, with the expectations and with the inability to have any privacy, and the inability to speak without having all of your words misconstrued. I think that was something that happened to Kurt a lot with his songs. I mean, think about like Rape Me, for example. He had to be like, guys, like, I'm not saying that sexual assault is a good thing. Like, why would anybody say that? Like, you guys are just misunderstanding what I'm saying. He dealt with that the entire time he was in the public eye.
Yeah. And I think about, so Bleach came out in 89, and Kurt was 22 years old.
Crazy.
Right. And Nevermind came out like 2 years later. So he was 24. And I think about, in my personal athletic journey, and most people, like, your freshman year when no one knows your name, like, is the easiest to play freely and to be like, before you win anything, like, you're just playing with, say, house money, and you're just playing the game because you love it, blah, blah, blah. Or you're writing music because it's super special. All of a sudden you get the name attached to you because you've done something. And then all of a sudden everything changes. People change the way that the scope that people look at you. And, that happens to the college players. And, Kurt was 22, 24 when he really broke it big. That's young, and I think everybody that's listening to this, that is at least, even upper 20s, because we're upper 20s, and I can understand now, like, I didn't know anything, you don't know anything when you're 20 to 20, 18 to 23. I mean,
you don't.
And you still don't know anything when you're 25, 26. And like, it's never like that is, you're changing so much. And wow. I mean, and that's the time before social media was so big, and it was still so hard because of everything else that is being publicized about them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's like one of those things. I love that analogy you made, because, for example, like, if you kind of convert it to like athletics, right? Like, Bleach was maybe, let's say Bleach was like the high school performance that got him recruited to the school. And then like his freshman year, his breakout performance was Nevermind. And the same thing in athletics as it is in music. Whenever you reach a high height for the rest of your career, you are expected not only to match it, but to exceed it. And with Kurt, they make Nevermind. Nirvana makes Nevermind, and it sets the world on fire, and rightfully so. It's some incredible music, life-changing music. From that point forward, they were expected to any superlative that somebody had in their mind of Nirvana from Nevermind, they were expected to match it and exceed it every night when they played live, and every single piece of music they put out from that point forward. And with it, they got massively successful, and people loathe success, of other people a lot of times. And I think that was something that Kurt struggled with a lot. And he's like, you make this thing that everybody thinks is the greatest thing in the world, but they're consuming it and they're grateful that it's there, yet they're upset that you're successful because of it. And Kurt dealt with so much of that coming from kind of like a punk background.
Right.
Another favorite quote of his for me is when he said that I don't blame the average 17-year-old punk rock kid for calling me a sellout. I understand that. And maybe when they grow up a little bit, they'll realize there's more things to life than living out your rock and roll identity so righteously.
Yeah.
And that one for me is way up there in terms of the most insightful things that I think anybody said about being in the public eye and being successful. It's just, it puts it so perfectly. Like there are things more important. And not only that, when you make something, it's completely out of your hands once it's out in the world. What people do with it, what people think of it. And I mean, they put Nevermind out, and the fact that it became this, how do you say, kind of like slogan or hallmark of a generation where like everybody older was like, look at this record with the baby on it. Like this is what the youths are these days. Like to become a standard bearer for a generation, like that's out of your control. You don't force that to happen. It happens to you. And with it, you know, all of the judgment and expectations that people set, they happen to you. And I don't know how you can respond to those things.
Yeah, no, that is a great quote. That's one I was looking at next. Because yeah, like as you get older, you change a little bit, and like you said, it's not about living out your rock and roll identity so righteously, you know. And I think that is, you know, it's easy for people to say that aren't famous to like, why'd you sell out? Because they have nothing to sell, as we say.
Yeah.
And you know, people, it's just impossible to understand. And yeah, he was spot on when he said that. And like, you know, these quotes we wrote down a bunch that we're probably not going to get to, but we want to talk about the like some of the words, because we know Kurt from, everybody knows Kurt from his performances and the music that he put out, and you know, you take that and you make it what you want. But then he has a lot of other writings and other talkings, which is, you know, we're not going to hang out with Kurt until another life, you know. So this is another, these are insights into like how he talked it and how he thought and like some of the things. And it's beautiful because a lot of it is like really well thought out, like, you know, almost like poems and like, you know, just excerpts that are just great. Like, you know, could be in books and just, they're really insightful. And you know, there's a bunch here that we could go through, and I appreciate this stuff almost more than the music that he wrote, because, you know, Nirvana, I mean, there's a lot of fans out there. And I think those fans, the deepest fans obviously were there when it happened. So it's different, but going back and listening to Nirvana is not everybody's go-to. I don't care what you say. When people say they're big Nirvana fans, like, and they're like, oh, I listen to Bleach all the time. I mean,
it's not my go-to.
It's not. And that's, you know, music ebbs and flows, and you go to it when you need it. But, you know, I just think that people probably overestimate their fandom a lot of times with Nirvana, but, you know, not when it comes to Kurt as a person. Like, I mean, his influence and like all this other stuff is, I mean, he was very special.
Yeah, and I think, like, I mean, his words and who he was for me is just as inspiring and just as moving as any of the music that he made. And it's really unfortunate that so many people kind of looked at Nirvana and looked at Kurt especially, and just kind of viewed him as this like angsty, upset, pissed off, you know, young guy who's just screaming, you know, about how like the world sucks now. Like he was so much more than that. And there was so much behind that kind of played into it. Like he was very well thought. Like you could tell that he spent a lot of time in his own head, kind of thinking about things and charting paths and everything. And you know, getting back to the thought that I made earlier, just really quickly, about how like when you make something, you're expected to like stay at that level forever, and you're expected to do that same thing forever. I had a really good conversation last week with someone about how kind of what is alternative music and like how we ascribe labels to things. And it's like, can you forecast like what's going to be alternative and like set out to create that? And like if you're an alternative band, just because you were once alternative, does that always make you alternative? Or like when you're welcomed into it, like Nirvana, for example, I mean, they came from like, for me, it seems, I feel like they're more like undergroundy, like punk than they are alternative, but then they became that. So it's like, is the work previously, like, is Bleach alternative, and is In Utero, like, is it all alternative, and like how do these labels play into it? And I just think it's completely out of a band's control. But going back to it, it's like, okay, now you're grunge, so you need to do grunge forever. And with In Utero, Kurt spoke about how it was kind of the closing of the chapter of 3-chord grunge for them. And he said that grunge is kind of boring for us. It's not something we can deny. We're not going to stop playing the old songs, but our tastes are just changing so rapidly. And I think that's one thing that he struggled with, that anybody would struggle with, where it's like you become famous and successful in one area and you're expected to stay in that area and do that same thing forever because the people want more, regardless of whether they want to make more of it or whether it's interesting or it makes them happy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting too, when we think about, say this podcast and this page, when we started it, it was 8 years ago, and we've been doing, these pods for 3 years, and, we've grown now. You are older than Kurt Cobain was.
Ever
and
was.
And his whole career happened, for you right now, his whole career happened before. It's like if you were to be as successful. And so like our thoughts have changed and our understanding has changed over the years towards this man, because I think we have a much better understanding, just kind of, quote, outliving him. And yeah, it's I don't know. It is really something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I've had that thought recently since I turned 27, and I think Kurt lived until he was 27 in 2 months, and I'm more than 27 and 2 months old now. And I mean, I couldn't handle the things at 24 that he had to deal with at 24. I couldn't handle the things at 26 that he dealt with at 26 with In Utero and everything. And it's just like, I think over the course of his life and over the course of Nirvana, like, I can't help but think that he probably got fatigued with all of it that came with it. And, him trying to be people, putting him in that position to like be a spokesman for everybody his age, or a spokesman for grunge musicians, whatever that may mean. And I love one more quote that he said. And Kurt said, "I'm a spokesman for myself. It just so happens that there's a bunch of people that are concerned with what I have to say. And that I find frightening, because at times I'm just as confused as most people. I don't have the answers for anything." And that's another one for me that's right up there with him, with anything that he's said. Because I mean, it's true. Like, who does have the answers for everything? And just because you're successful or you've made something that impacts somebody doesn't mean that you're automatically going to understand things better than other people or be able to deal with things better than other people.
Yeah, and I look at that quote and I think about, obviously, what he wrote about and what he talked about. If you think about like mental health or the social issues and the sexism and racism and all these things that are controversial, and like really coming down to the morality around life, and how people it's like a lot of belief, right? So it's not science or it's not math. Like, the answers aren't just like what they are. Mm-hmm. And you get people on all the sides. So when he says like, I don't have the answers, because the stuff we're talking about and I'm like bringing light to is like it's not the same for everybody. And although it should be or could be, it's just like, it's not.
And the experiences aren't the same that people have,
Yeah, exactly. The experiences are not the same. I mean, there's tons of things that I've changed my thoughts on over the years as I've lived more life, and you don't understand certain things until you live certain things. You know what I mean?
You meet different people who live with those things as you gain a better worldview.
Right.
I think it's
living
so
in different
important.
areas. Yeah, living in different countries or states and stuff, and like we're visiting different countries is probably I tell people all the time to go live somewhere else, and I'm so thankful to have lived in different areas of the United States, because it's one thing to go and see something else. It's another thing to go live there and live around those cultures. And so yeah, I mean, like, he was taking on huge issues and giving and just saying a spokesperson for himself, and that's all he could do. But it was obviously taken and put on a billboard in a lot in every way of every way you can think of.
Yeah, and you could tell that he thought a lot about things, and he was outspoken as it related to himself, but it was one of those things where, he wanted to speak just as Kurt, not as Kurt Cobain, leader of Nirvana, leader of this movement. And he had, he was remarkably well thought, I think, and certainly in my opinion on the right side of history with a lot of the social issues. On I think it was on
All right, and
Incestus side on the liner notes. He said, "If you're a sexist, racist, homophobe, or basically an asshole, don't buy this CD. I don't care if you like me. I hate you."
Yeah. And yeah, it's like also revisionist history in a lot of ways where, now we look back and we're like, okay, like he was, right on a lot of things, and he stood up, and it was probably really hard during that time to really see.
And we lose that view of like, we don't realize how hard it must have been to say stuff like that then 30 years ago, 32 years ago.
Yeah. My dad, he does this, he does a group like every, once a month where he talks about what's going on in the world and views and how it's changing. And he brought up one of the things he did. He tells a quote. He like says a quote in the beginning, and he says like, who said that basically. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to butcher like exactly what it was. But it was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and it was like he wasn't recognized for his findings until 50 years later. So he basically was ahead of, and like I said, I can't remember exactly what he was talking about, but that is beside the point. But he basically made an assertion, and no one believed him. And then 50 years later, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for it because people came around to the idea.
Right.
But he wasn't recognized. He didn't get flowers, but he was criticized. But then 50 years later, it's like, oh yeah, you were right. Like that was a good point. And it's like, how do you, so when you have these ideas and you have things that you want to say and you believe, obviously it's not always right just because, you just put that out there too. But like at the same time, like, there's a reason you believe them. There's a reason that you have these thoughts. So don't shy away when, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And I think, the next one of the other quotes I'll read, Kurt says, "I like to blame my parents' generations for coming so close to social change, then giving up after a few successful efforts by the media and government to deface the movement by using the Mansons and other hippie representative as propaganda examples on how they were nothing but unpatriotic, communist, satanic, inhumane disease. And in turn, the baby boomers become the ultimate conforming yuppie hypocrites a generation has ever produced." And that's loaded.
Mic drop, yeah.
Yeah, like that's loaded. And but also like, in say like you wouldn't consider like in say uneducated or like this person is clearly like well thought out, like we've talked about. I mean, it's very like strong words.
Yeah, and you can tell like I think through Kurt, like his thoughtfulness and his empathy always stick out to me with whenever I hear him speak in interviews or read his words, thinking about like that. I mean, he goes on a a little tangent, not tangent, but you know what I mean, about social change. And like he's thinking about these things and he's trying to, the best as he can as a citizen, be a champion for these things. Like you can tell that, like, I mean, he cares about other people and he cares about people maybe who come from different experiences like we were talking about earlier, other than his. And, he didn't come from the best experiences either. And, to still be able to come from that and be dealing with these problems and still thinking of other people and wanting what's best for them. I've always admired that about him. And I continue to do that. And it's been informative for, certain ways that I want to carry myself and live my life. I mean, he was just a special person, and you can tell, I mean, even through it all, he always loved his work. And I think he was a musician, right? Like he just strove to create in whatever way. And one quote of his that I really, really love, that we always say back and forth to one another, the first part of it, is that words suck. I mean, everything has been said. Words aren't as important as the energy derived from music, especially live. And we always kind of cut up the first part, like words suck, everything's been said. But I think the second part is just as important as it relates to Kurt. I mean, how much respect and reverence he had for live music and for playing and creating, talking about the fact that, it's one of the most vital sources of energy that you can find. I mean, if as a music fan and as a listener and as a musician, like if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what does.
Hmm. Yeah, that is really, yeah, it makes me think about John Frusciante and saying,
Yeah.
talk about music and how it's, never the people like, you need to look at their music to really understand who they are. And I guess, we also just talked about all the words that Kurt said, but really, and he was so confident on stage, right? And the way that he performed and the way that he gave performances and felt free to do that, and how he, destroyed instruments and sets and, scream and all the antics that he did. Like that is what we have of him. And that's the best picture that we can derive looking back. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, through his music and through his words and through his life and through his death, I think he continues to inspire. And we'll close with a quote here that's not from Kurt, but is from his drummer, Dave Grohl. And Dave said that when Kurt died, I remember the next day and thinking, I still get to live, so I'm going to live every day like it's my last one. Even if that's the worst day, I'm going to try to appreciate it. And I still feel that way. I mean, Kurt was one of those people, the way he lived and the fact that he died so young, he inspired. I mean, he carried so much weight with who he was that is still impacting people. I mean, there's people who are like 8 years old now who know who Kurt is, and he's somebody that people are always going to know, and he's somebody that is always going to inspire other people. And that's a testament to who he was, and the fact that we're talking about it, and we're still inspired by a lot of his music and a lot of what he said, as we mentioned today. But I love that quote, whether or not it's related to Kurt, I appreciate and I value what Dave said, every day, even if it's the worst one, try to make it the best worst day you can have, and do that every day, and remember that, because that's important, and the days add up, and that's how you can go on and continue to do great things.
yeah. And the last thing that I would say is I saw a skateboarder had passed away recently. And, one of the comments was like, and it's tough when the loss is a part of life. So it's going to keep happening, and you're going to have people die way before their time. And one of the comments was like, so sorry for your loss, make sure, I pray for the family that they make this, death like important to their family, and they make it a moment and something that is talked about, and like, you use it to fuel the rest of your life. You don't just let it kind of pass, but you talk about it and you put it in a light that makes you, as as Dave said, like you live on and you live every day knowing that, one, it could be your last, and two, life is precious, and all these things. So, when stuff happens, make death important in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, you make it stand out, and you make it carry something that, I would say there's a lot of things in life that are, say, encouraging and inspirational. Life and death is like going to give you every emotion. So being able to turn death into something that is positive and can live on and use, and the legacy, all of these things, like that is the only way to move through those times, because it is extremely difficult to wrap your head around. I mean, this kid was 27 when he died.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a perfect sentiment to end on.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to be playing some Nirvana today. I can feel it.
Oh, and, yeah.
I got a song of the week that actually popped up, and it may be on the list. I got to see when I add it.
That's all right. We can add again.
Because it is a tribute to the mighty KC. And this song is from Four Squirrels, and it's a band back, I think they were in Florida, and it's a tragic story about the band as well, but they wrote the song The Mighty KC for Kurt Cobain. And it's just it's an awesome rock song that pays tribute, and definitely a band that was influenced big time by him. And it's just one of the songs that I enjoy listening to. And the lyrics don't mention, it's not like directly talking about him or his life, but you can tell that the sentiment behind it was for one of their idols.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I'll follow your lead with a Kurt inspired song. I am going to choose the Foo Fighters song "Friend of a Friend," which dates back to 1990. Grohl wrote this about kind of his first impressions of Kurt and Chris Novoselic in Nirvana, and then he went on to record it. It appeared on the Foo Fighters album "In Your Honor," most notably. So that's going to be my song of the week. Thinking back to Kurt and those who knew him and those were inspired by him.
That's awesome. That was good, Chris. Thank you so much for talking and, shedding some light, I guess, on some of the words that Kurt said over the years. I hope that everybody out there enjoyed it and, maybe can think about it a little differently and, be inspired.
Absolutely. Ethan, thank you. This was very enjoyable for me, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed it as well. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a good day. Make it a good day, just as Dave said at the end of the episode. So with that, we're going to wrap up, and we will see you next week for episode 160. But until then, rock and roll and stay heavy.
Stay heavy, guys. Thank you. See you soon.
We'll see you later.